Fake news next on One Gospel's One Idea. Okay, we're going to be talking about the adulterous woman. Now, this is a story in the Gospel of John that the Christian world is completely split on. Basically, most scholars believe that it did not actually happen, that it's fake news, hence our title. So, what do you think, Holly? Do you think it's real?
I don't know.
You have an open mind? Okay, well, let's take a look. So, let's talk about the context. So, Jesus' last trip to Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. So, this isn't his final trip. That would be, do you remember which feast that was, Holly?
I don't.
It was Passover. Anyway, Feast of Tabernacles. This is in the fall. So, probably the fall before his death. Jesus had been teaching in the temple court and creating controversy. The people were divided over who he was, whether he was prophet, demon-possessed, Messiah, charlatan, lots of stuff. During the last day of the feast, there was an unsuccessful attempt to arrest him. So things are getting hot, but it wasn't his time to be arrested yet. That led to a meeting of the Pharisees and the chief priests about Jesus. And Nicodemus, who was actually a secret follower of Jesus, was in that meeting and said, well, hey, don't we need to investigate the matter before acting further? Their response to him was, they said to him, are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has arisen out of Galilee. And then, ... So we're going to read what the majority text has, what actually, the next thing that happened. But we're going to talk about what it looks like also if that wasn't there. So let's do it. Nicodemus said to them, he who came to Jesus by night being one of them, does our Torah judge a man before it hears him and knows what he is doing? They said to him, are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has arisen out of Galilee. And everyone went to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came to the temple again, and all the people came to him. He sat down and taught them. The Torah teachers and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. When they had set her in the middle, they said to him, Rabbi, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the Torah commanded us that such persons should be stoned. But what do you say? They said this, testing him, that they might have something to accuse him with. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, he among you who is without sin, let him cast a stone at her first. And he stooped down again and wrote on the ground. Those who heard, being convicted by their consciences, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the middle. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So, we are going to talk about this passage. So from John 7:53 to 8:11, there is this interaction between Jesus, scribes, Pharisees, and an adulterous woman. It's not considered authentic by most scholars today. They would say that the text flows just fine from 7:52 to 8:12. So I'm just going to flip back and tell you what that would look like. So it would go from saying, okay, Nicodemus is talking. They said to him, "Are you also from Galilee? Search and look, for no prophet has arisen out of Galilee." Then the next thing that would be him saying, dun, 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 "Then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world." Okay, so they're saying, hey, that's really what happened. And they would actually say that, well, having this section in of him talking to the adulterous woman doesn't fit. Because they would say, well, wait a minute, let's look at this. Jesus was left alone and the woman standing in the middle. So they have this conversation. And then as soon as she leaves, it says, then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. So who was he speaking to? What do you think, Holly?
That's a good question.
Right. Okay. Well, I accept their challenge of saying that, hey, this isn't totally, what's going on. Well, who left? It was the people accusing him. Where were they? In the temple court. Is the temple court usually empty, Holly?
Nope.
Is it just possible there might be other humans there?
Lots of them.
There just might be other humans. So when he's saying, I am the light of the world, might he be saying it to the public?
Mm-hmm.
And now it says, therefore the Pharisees said to him, you testify concerning yourself, your testimony is not true. So we see here that the Pharisees they're coming back and now having an argument with him, right? Is it possible, Holly, that the people who brought the adulterous woman to Jesus, who then walked away, is it possible that they weren't the only Pharisees in the temple court that day?
Quite probably.
Yeah, and that they had left, but there were other Pharisees there in the crowd.
Yeah.
I know it's crazy to believe
Mind-blowing.
that. The Pharisees were merely the most populous denomination in Judaism that day. I mean, how would you expect more than a couple to be in the temple court?
Yep.
It's just inexplainable, isn't
Mind-blowing.
it? Inexplainable. Okay, so now let's go back to, they say that the context makes sense in their order, okay? Now let's flip back here, Holly.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicodemus is talking to the Pharisees and the chief priests. They're having a conversation about Jesus. Is Jesus there?
When they're having the conversation.
Right. Is Jesus there?
I don't think so.
No. They're having a meeting about Jesus because they're like, hey, we can't arrest this guy. So they're having a meeting that night after, everyone had gone to, to do whatever, right? So the preceding context is there's this meeting going on with the Pharisees, chief priest, Nicodemus is there. They think the logical next thing to say is, then Jesus spoke again to them, saying, I am the light of the world. So, okay, we're going right from a meeting to Jesus is talking to them. Is that a smooth transition, Holly?
Mm-mm.
No, it's not. So the solution that they offer is not actually better than the problem that they believe that they're showing. All right. So now that we've at least talked about that part of it, the textual part of it, let's talk about what's really going on. So, because I'm just, I already did all that. Okay. Now, the actual textual evidence is why they would say this. So they say that it's not found in the two oldest Greek papyri. So P66 and P75, likely around 200 AD, but it actually might be before that. They're saying, hey, that doesn't have that in there. Okay. We'll call it Exhibit A. It's not found in the two oldest near complete Bibles, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, both around 350 AD. Okay. We'll call that Exhibit B. Some later Greek manuscript families place it as an appendix after the Gospel of John, or they even put it in Luke. So that means that, at least some Greek manuscript families didn't know where to put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But is that the whole story?
Never is.
It seldom is the whole story. Okay. So the story is found in the Vulgate, the Latin Bible written by Jerome around 382 AD. Okay? So there's no controversy about this. It's in the Latin Bible. And Jerome actually used Greek manuscripts to make his Latin Bible because the older Latin manuscripts that existed at the time were widely variant. They had lots of different readings, and actually there was a problem in the Latin church because they're like, we really need to have a definitive version. So the Bishop of Rome, later to be called a pope, said to Jerome, I need you to do this because you're the man. And so he took the earliest Greek manuscripts available to him. Here's his quote. He's going to read it.
I therefore promise in this short preface the 4 Gospels only, which are to be taken in the following order: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, as they have been revised by a comparison of the Greek manuscripts. Only early ones have been used. But to avoid any great divergences from Latin, which we are accustomed to read, I have used my pen with some restraint. And while I have corrected only such passages as seem to convey a different meaning, I have allowed the rest to remain as they are.
Okay, so this is what Jerome said in his preface written to the Bishop of Rome. He says, and I quote, a comparison of the Greek manuscripts. Only early ones have been used, period. So, all right, let's think about this just for a second. So, in 382, Jerome used the earliest Greek manuscripts available to him, and he included this in the Gospel of John. Is it possible, Holly, that he had more numerous, earlier, and or better Greek manuscripts than we have today?
Possibly.
I'm going to go with very, very likely.
Yeah.
Because all we have today is like stuff that, survived time, which is completely random.
Yeah.
In fact, the stuff that was heavily used, the stuff that people really liked and used, that stuff all got destroyed.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that wasn't used that randomly survives to today.
Correct.
All right. Now, why would some Greek manuscripts omit the passage but not others? Augustine, who was a contemporary of Jerome, in his treatise on adulterous marriages, says that some manuscripts actually omitted the passage so as to not encourage sin.
But now after that Christ has said to the woman taken in adultery, and I also will not condemn you, go your way, sin no more hereafter, who understands not that the husband ought to forgive, that he sees the Lord of them both did forgive, and that he ought not now to call her an adulteress, whose crimes at her repentance he believes is forgiven by the mercifulness of God. But the unfaithful men's understanding abhors this, insomuch that some, having little faith, or rather being enemies of true faith, fearing, as I suppose, the liberty to sin without punishment is given to their wives, would pull out of their books that which the Lord did, in pardoning the woman taken in adultery, as though he had permitted and given liberty to sin, who said, sin no more hereafter.
Okay. I apologize for the awkwardness. The only version I could find for free was a 1582 version, and then I just tried to make it slightly modern, but I really didn't. So, but if you look at what it says they were worried that liberty to sin without punishment was being given to the wives, so they pulled it out of their books. That what the Lord did. Now, you could say, come on, dude. Augustine is just making that up. Well, yeah, it's possible. But you know what? Augustine is actually at least pointing out that some of the manuscripts have it and some of them don't. And he's at least giving what some people might view as a plausible explanation for why some of them had it and some of them didn't. Now, other things I'll add is just, the two earliest Greek papyri that we have, P66 and P75, they're both incomplete copies of John. They have omissions from John other than the section we are talking about. I will also add that Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus have indisputable copy errors throughout them. Now, I'm not going to sit and argue over textual criticism because I'm just not the person that can do that. But, it's not like there's reasons to give a little bit of salt, a little grain of salt. What do you think, Holly? Just a little pinch?
Yep.
Of Old Bay?
Tad.
Okay. And then, I already brought this up. I will add that the awkwardness assigned to the transition equally applies to the transition that they believe is in the correct version. And I'll even throw out some speculation about the Gospel of John's evolution. You want to hear some speculation, Holly?
I love it.
All right. So if you look at the Gospel of John, just look at the way it's written, and you look at John chapter 20 and how it ends, there's basically an ending at the end of John chapter 20. And then John chapter 21 is almost like an appendix where it just starts again. And then at the end of John 21, there's an ending. I think that a lot of people say, well, just looking at the structure of it, John chapter 21 may have been written after John chapter 20. And they use it as evidence in their minds to say that, there was, an evolution of the Gospel of John until its final version, and this was added at some later date. I can understand that flow of logic, but I also think that, the Gospel of John didn't have a copyright date. The Gospel of John, I don't see any reason to believe it wasn't written by John. And I don't think John was constrained in the way that a modern writer is. A modern writer writes something and then it's printed as first edition. And if they decide to revise it at some later point, they'll call it the revised version, or they'll call it volume 2 or the second edition or blah, 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 right? They did not do that back then. So it is very possible that John wrote his gospel, had the initial ending, and then John, while he was still alive, but at a later time, added another chapter because he felt inspired to do that. It's not like there's rules that say thou shalt not do that. So if the text itself gives you evidence that it could have had more than one version, not that the newer version is somehow altered or any less authentic, just that there might have been two versions of it, it's very possible that it was only the second version of John that John decided to add the story of the adulterous woman, and that there really were copies of this original version of John that didn't have it, and it was being faithfully reproduced. And then there was copies of John's, we're going to call it his final version, which was then faithfully reproduced. And so then you had multiple streams of Greek manuscripts, and it wasn't until people later, when they are compiling the Bible, like Jerome, who thoughtfully, prayerfully, that guy wrote his translation of the Vulgate actually by the cave that Jesus was supposedly born in. I mean, it was like, the magnum opus of his life. I mean, I'm pretty sure he really did his best. And, if someone could say, well, I don't believe it's inspired. Dude, I don't care if you believe it or not. I'm just saying that, there's a chance that you can actually have faith in the Bible that was given to us, and that, there was, like people had like Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, they don't have perfect copies, but the people that later created the majority text that we have today, that doesn't mean that their process was wrong. So anyway, I know I'm rambling, but are you with me, Holly?
I'm totally with you.
Okay. But is any of this really the point, Holly? Let's talk about the point. Or let's talk about a point. Okay. Experts consistently present their educated guesses as facts, often based on the smallest shreds of physical evidence. In so doing, they undermine the faith of the simple, and they embolden other people who all they know is to parrot the claims of the experts. Jesus says that causing one of his little ones to stumble deserves a fate worse than death. So all I would say is, I just don't think I'd be really confident about it. I would just tread lightly. That's my point. You with me, Hall?
Totally.
Word.